Hey, thanks for dropping by and checking out this message. These lessons come from our Sunday gatherings at Victory Christian Church in Franklin, Indiana. Our 5th through 8th graders meet at 9 or 10:30 a.m. and our high schoolers meet from 6 to 8 p.m. If you find that this content brings value to your life, then please consider subscribing and hitting that bell so that you can be notified when we upload our next message. Our hope is that this video brings more clarity into your life as to who God is and what He wants for you in light of who Jesus is and what He's done for you. Enjoy and have a great day. Many of us we all have that thing where, like, one time we're standing there, we're watching somebody do something, and maybe it was one of the challenges that we did for the game tonight, where you had to like do something like chug a whole water bottle without puking or whatever, and you got to be the first one to do it or whatever it is, and you think, oh, that's easy, I could do that, right? How many of you see something somebody else is doing, and maybe it's difficult, maybe it's not, but you look at it and you think, I could do that. Like, anybody, you know what that is, right? Have any of you seen the movie The Game Plan with like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson? So he's a star like quarterback football player, and he recently finds out he has a daughter, and she's a ballerina, and so that's kind of where this clip picks up. I'll have you guys watch this.
No, absolutely not.
So I love that scene because it's so funny. It's like you think it's easy until you actually start doing it. And you know, this huge, like, well-known football player, super buff. I actually look like that under this hoodie. I know you can't tell, but I try to be modest. So that was a really bad dad joke. I apologize. So, but you get the idea. He thinks it's easy. It's not a real sport. You know, anybody can do that. And by the end of it, he's like dying, right? And so we've all kind of had that thing where we see something and we think, oh, I could do that. That's pretty easy, right? And then you actually try doing it, and it's like experiencing it is completely different from actually trying to just to do it. Experiencing it is different than watching somebody else do it and thinking that you can do it, right? And so something else when we're bringing that back around to our faith, and we're in this series called Storyteller. And so in the whole series, we've been talking about the different stories or parables that Jesus has told, because He is the master storyteller. And He knows how to captivate His audience's attention. He knows how to make His point, and He knows how to make it well. And so how many of you guys, you remember what a parable is? Just shout it out. If you were to define what a parable is, how would you define a parable? An earthly story with a godly meaning. Okay, yeah. Anything else specifically? So the point of a parable is because Jesus wanted to change the perception of His audience. He was always talking to either the religious leaders, or He was talking to the sinners, the people who did stuff wrong, and the religious leaders looked down on. He was trying to reshape people's perspectives on who God is and what He thinks of us. So parables are an earthly story with a heavenly meaning, but they are meant to describe better and help us understand, to shift our perspective on who God is as our Heavenly Father, because the people saw the Pharisees as the best representation for God. And they had their noses in the air looking down on everybody else, telling everybody else where they were falling short. They had their own sins that they didn't let anybody else see. And so their motivations were wrong. They were kind of power hungry. And Jesus saying, no, that's not what God actually looks like. And He tells these stories to reshape their perspective on who God is and what He thinks of us. And when you actually read the stories and the teachings of Jesus, we find that God is very different from sometimes how we make Him out to be. Sometimes we have people in our own lives that we kind of don't realize we do this, but we look at those people and we kind of imagine, well, God must be kind of like them, either because they're authority figures or they're a parent figure or whatever it is. And Jesus is trying to say, you know what, we've got a lot of imperfect examples on the Father, but I am the perfect representation of the Father. If you see me, you see Him. So He starts telling these stories, and He tells them in order to make a point and change people's perspective on who God is and what He thinks about us. And one of the things that is really, really, really difficult to do, it looks easy, you can talk about it all you want, but when you try to do it, it's incredibly difficult, and that thing is forgiveness. See, it's really easy. It makes a lot of sense. And probably most of you in this room, if I asked you what forgiveness is, you could tell me what it is. It's loving your neighbor. It's just letting stuff go when people have wronged you and all that kind of stuff, not holding a grudge. And that sounds all great and easy. And if everybody did that, we'd all get along much better. But We all know it's much more difficult than that, because forgiveness is easy until you have to do it. Just like many things in life, it's easy until you yourself are put in a position where you have to forgive somebody for the wrong that they've done to you. And so Jesus is actually, he finds the perfect opportunity to tell a little story and to talk about this, because Peter, one of his 12 disciples, asks Jesus a question. So if we go to Matthew chapter 18, this is what he says. And this is Peter speaking. He says, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times?" And so if you've grown up in church, or if you've heard this passage, or if you've kind of know the basic background here, you kind of know what's coming. But when Peter was asking this question, it's kind of like one of those things, you ask a question to know like how far you have to get to, like, before it's wrong, or how many times you have to do something for it to be considered done, right? And it's like when a teacher says your essay has to be 500 words, you like add lots of adjectives and lots of different things to stretch it out and make it go as long as you can, because you're trying to reach that 500 words at a minimum and to be done, right? And you don't want to do even 501 words. You just want to turn in that essay and be done. And so Peter's asking this question like, okay, I really don't want to forgive somebody a lot, so how many times do I have to forgive them in order to be right with you? Yeah? And so actually, 7 is a symbolic number. Whenever you read the Bible and you see numbers, they often carry weight more than they are actually measured. So that comes into play when you read all sorts of sections of the Bible, specifically when it comes to prophecy, like in Revelation or some of the Old Testament prophets. Numbers carry weight more than they carry measurement. And when you see the number 7, it actually is representative of completion. There's 7 days in creation and everything was complete. I know one of them was a rest day, but it still counts as 7 days of creation. And so, 7 represents for God and his people completion. And Peter's asking, it's up to 7 times? He thinks that's being gracious. Like up to 7 times is a lot of times to forgive somebody, right? And he was thinking maybe 3, because 3 is also a significant number. So maybe 3, but I'll say 7 and get on his good side, right? And actually that's not the case at all. So Jesus responds in the next verse. He says, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times." Now, he didn't really mean like keep track of all 77 times that you have to forgive somebody. He's using a figure of speech. He said, you think 7 is complete, like 77. Some translations say 7 times 70 times. And basically just meaning an infinite amount of completion. Like you have to forgive more times than you can even count. You forgive and forgive and forgive. And for Peter and for any of his apostles listening, they were a little taken back by that. So he continues. He's like, okay, well, let me tell you a little bit of a story. Here's how he gets into his parable for this week. Starting in the next verse, he says, "Therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children all be sold to repay the debt. And at this, the servant fell on his knees before him. 'Be patient with me,' he begged, 'and I will pay back everything.' The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go." So a couple things to recap that. Like 10,000 bags of gold, it is like, just because we don't use gold as currency now, that's like millions of dollars today. So imagine you owe somebody like $2 million, and they're like, okay, I'm going to throw you into jail. Your family is going to go hungry, or I'm going to sell them to somebody else who may not treat them well, because servants weren't regarded really as human a lot of times, especially women and children. They didn't have the rights that men did, and so you're not going to be able to take care of your family anymore. And this guy, he says, "I will pay you back," right? But he's so desperate, like he says anything to try to get a second chance. Realistically, the readers all know, and the listeners, Jesus' disciples, they know this guy is never going to be able to repay 10,000 bags of gold, right? This is crazy. Like, this is not pocket change. And he's saying, the master takes pity on him, lets him go. So, for somebody who's just been forgiven this massive debt, this is remember, we're talking about forgiveness. This is what happens next. So starting in verse 28, it says, "But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. So this guy has just been forgiven of his debt of like an unreachable amount of money. And then he lets him go. So he's like, you can imagine he's got the weight lifted off his shoulders. So he goes to find somebody who owes him money. And you'd think like that he would want to continue like, the pay it forward ideology. Like I'll just, I've been forgiven this. I'm going to go cancel, my servant's debts, right? But unfortunately, that's not what happened. He grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me and I will pay it back. Sounds familiar, right? But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt, which is a life sentence, right? Because when you're in prison, you can't pay back anything. You can't work, you're trapped. You are literally in jail. And so this guy has no mercy. And maybe he was just so shaken up by the idea that he might have gotten thrown into prison, that he was about to lose his family. And he's like, I'm never going to get myself in that position again. I'm going to go collect on all my... Maybe he didn't even believe his master when he had said he'd forgive him of the debts. Maybe he thought he just said that while he's plotting to kill me or something. So maybe he's thinking, I'm just going to go and collect every debt that's owed to me, and I'll bring my master something. Maybe he's having a little bit of a breakdown after that experience. But he goes to the servant, and he's, it's pocket change compared to the 10,000 bags of gold that he owed. Starts saying, pay back what you owe me. And it's obvious that this story goes in a very different direction than what we think it should. But just because we understand that we should do something doesn't mean that it's easy for us to do that. In fact, whenever we see somebody else that completely throws away and misses the point of something that just happened to them, it kind of makes us sick. It makes us angry. In fact, this guy, check out what happens next. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. This was the one that forgave his debt of 10,000 bags of gold. He calls him and he goes, you wicked servant. He said, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? And we're thinking, duh, we all knew that, right? And Jesus' apostles who are standing there listening to him, his disciples are probably going, yeah, like what an idiot, right? He should have known better. But in anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. So now not only was he going to go to jail, he was going to be tortured until he could pay back all he owed. And the owner is like, come on, what are you doing? I just gave you this free gift. Why are you not going and sharing that? But Jesus adds the exclamation mark after this story. And here's what he says. In order to wrap this all up, he says, this is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. And I think we all know what he's talking about there. See, as Christians, we believe that Jesus came to earth. He left the comforts of heaven. He was God in human likeness, and he came to show us who the Father is, really. Not what the Pharisees portrayed him to be. Not somebody who is just angry with everybody, but somebody who comes not to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. And he looks at all of us and he loves us so desperately that he's willing to do whatever it takes to win us back. And so he decides to come down and he sacrifices himself, because Romans tells us that the wages of sin is death, that we will forever be separate from God unless our debt is paid. And it doesn't matter if you've done the worst thing imaginable, if you've got the worst reputation in your school for doing all the horrible things, if you've gotten expelled from school after school after school, and you just doing all the things that people say you shouldn't do, or you just told one little white lie. No matter what you've done, if you have done wrong, if you have made mistakes, if you have sinned in any capacity that has separated you from God. Now, something that's hard for people to understand, because we all kind of think, well, I'm basically a good person, right? Or we look at somebody else and we think, well, surely, and we kind of think in black and white sometimes because it's easier for us to think in black and white. But we think, well, that person's such a good person, even though they don't follow all the rules in the Bible, how could God throw them to hell, right? And it's questions that we have as Christians. In fact, that's one of the things that we're going to be talking in a lot of depth in this weekend at Challenge Accepted. But we see that and we think, well, why would God punish someone? They're basically a good person, but what we have to realize is our definition of good and bad is not the same. If we have sinned, we have sinned. We're separated from God. Now, certain sins carry more weight and consequences than other sins. Like you tell a little white lie and you're caught in it, you might get grounded for a little bit from your parents. But, if you're having sex with your boyfriend or girlfriend and you guys get pregnant, that's got a whole nother set of consequences to it. And so you can see just maybe sin has different consequences, but it all is equal in that it separates us from God. And so Jesus is saying, no matter what it is, we have to, in order to recognize how badly we need to forgive others, we have to recognize how badly we ourselves have needed forgiveness. Because until we recognize how big the weight that the debt that we have, we're never going to fully be able to release other people from the perceived debts that they have from us. Because refusing to forgive is kind of its own form of punishment, isn't it? Like think about the last time you were holding a grudge against somebody. Like maybe somebody did something to you intentionally or unintentionally, but maybe they even remember it today, but maybe they don't. Maybe it was last week, maybe it was 5 years ago. But when somebody has wronged you, if you hold on to that, you're the one that hasn't moved on. You're the one that's staying angry. You're the one that's staying bitter. You're the one that is allowing your begrudgment to really change your heart. Whereas the other person may or may not have given a second thought to that. And refusing to forgive is its own form of punishment. It holds us captive. It keeps us from truly experiencing God's love. And it just shows that we don't really understand the love that we have. So you've forgiven enough when you are free. That's what Jesus is saying. It's 77 times. You've forgiven enough times, Peter, when you are free. And you have to forgive in order to experience that freedom. When our eyes are open to all the ways that we aren't perfect, then giving other people a break will become a lot easier. So simply put, forgive like you have been forgiven. Because by the same measure that we forgive others will be the measurement used against us. God will forgive us based on how well we have forgiven other people. They can be people that people that are close to us, people that are not close to us, whatever, doesn't matter. Strangers, people that we have a close relationship with. Sometimes the hardest people to forgive are the people we're actually closest to, because we have more vulnerability, more attachment to that person. It makes it harder to let go of things. But for many of us in church, we have to remind ourselves that we are not as perfect as sometimes we think we are. Our pride is an ugly obstacle to forgiving others. Our judgmental attitude cuts others to the core. Our secret sins are bigger and could hurt more people than we care to really admit. Our words toward our parents could surprise a lot of people. Our envy and our jealousy may not show itself on the outside, but we know that it's brewing on the inside, and it is changing us. It is changing our hearts. So we're going to do something, and actually, back on the back, if leaders, you want to go ahead and grab those papers, they're going to pass out a paper to you guys, and on one side of the paper, on the top, it'll say, what I did to somebody. This one may take you a little bit. I want you to think about something that you have done that has wronged somebody else. It could be intentional or unintentional. Maybe you know that you unintentionally hurt somebody, but whatever it is, you might have to think a little bit more about it. But I want you to think for a few minutes, and I want you to write down, what you have done to somebody else. And then on the other bottom part, I want you to write what someone did to you. And this one, you'll probably be able to think of 3 or 4 right off the top of your head, because it's just kind of how our brains work that way. And I want you to write down that as well. We're going to give you just a few minutes here in a minute to be able to really focus on that. But what you need to receive forgiveness for, what you need to give forgiveness for, are connected. Freedom is found when you can give forgiveness and when you can receive it. because that's the telltale sign. If we are unable to forgive other people, then it kind of shows that we really don't believe that we ourselves have been forgiven. At least not in the way that God describes. So we're going to do a little time here. We're going to put some music on in the background. We're going to give you guys just a few minutes to do that. And then we're gonna close out with one more song. And during that song, once you have finished writing down on your paper, what I want you to do is I want you to come up here and I want you to stick it in the shredder. At some point during the song, if you are ready to let it go, if you are ready to allow God to change your heart in this, I want you to come up and shred it. If you're not ready, then don't feel the pressure just because other people are doing it. Hold on to it. Maybe talk to somebody about it. We have small group leaders for a reason. Maybe talk to a friend who did take theirs. I don't know. I don't know what you're comfortable with. I don't want to pressure you. But I do want you to think through this kind of thing. And there's something big that can happen when we symbolically lay down the burdens that we're carrying. And forgiveness can be like a big burden that weighs us down. And sometimes we don't even realize how much it's weighing us down until we choose to let it go. So we're going to let some music play and let you guys do that. And when we start singing this next song, we'll invite you guys to stand back up. And whenever you're ready, at some point during that song, you can walk up here and add that to the shredder. Hey, hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up and make sure you're subscribed so you're notified when we upload future videos. Have a great day.